In 1397, the powerful Florentine citizens of Palestrozzi and Corruccio Salutati, representing a small but curious group of humanists, convinced the preeminent scholar of Greek literature and philosophy, Emmanuel Chrysoloras, to come to Florence and teach ancient Greek. There he is. Vespasiano da Bisticci, in his Vite di Uomini Illustri, reveals the motivations for getting Chrysoloras to come for a visit. It's to fill in a gap of knowledge among the humanists, namely learning ancient Greek. With a bit of arm twisting, Chrysoloras eventually accepted the invitation, bringing with him a treasure trove of 8 Greek codices, one of which was Claudius Ptolemaeus' Geographic, which is possibly the Vatican Urbanus Graecus 82. Although Ptolemy was widely read in the preceding centuries of medieval scholasticism, he was not known as a cartographer, but he was often referred to as a prince of astrologers. Scholastics knew of Ptolemy's treatise of geography, but the work and its method for drawing projections of the earth had been long lost in the European West. The Florentine humanists used the geography as a textbook for learning Greek, and before 1400, Chrysoloras himself began a partial translation into Latin for teaching. In 1405, Leonardo Bruni took up translating the treatise, but it was Jacopo d'Angelo who finished it around 1409 or 1410. It's not certain. A translation into the Tuscan language would not arrive until the end of the century, with Francesco Berlinghieri's printed rhymed version. It was dedicated to Piero de' Medici, the eldest son of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Centuries later, the Italian geographer and map historian Roberto Almagià would celebrate the 15th century reintroduction of Ptolemy's geography as an Italian achievement that marked the dawn of modern cartography. The recent contributions to the history of cartography have cast Almagià's teleology into doubt, however, especially since there are very few pre-1450 manuscript copies of Ptolemy's that survive. And the ones that do survive seem to be personal copies used by specialists, niche specialists. The manuscripts suggest a different reception history pre-1450 that is imagined by Almagià and early schools of map historians. For scholarly interest as it relates to manuscript evidence, the inverse is true of Andrea da Barberino, a prolific composer of epic, flourishing at the same time as Chrysoloras was packing his bags for Florence. Despite cursory attention today, manuscripts of Andrea da Barberino's Carolingian epic, often copied in mercantile script in the 15th century, proliferate today in Florentine libraries and reveal the author's widespread fame. Immediately following Jacopo d'Angelo's Latin translation of Ptolemy, Andrea da Barberino set to work, composing his most famous work, the Guerrino Meschino, a meandering page-turner divided into 8 books recounting the travels of the errant knight Guerrino Meschino, who sets out to explore the entirety of the inhabited world in a quest to recover his lost identity. Guerrino has appeared in new copies and print editions from the moment Andrea finished all the way through to the early 20th century. Here we have a fumetto from 1940. And the question I hope to arrive to one day is Guerrino Meschino's role in Italy's fascist regime. Unlike Andrea's other works, which are rewritings and expansions of old French epic on the theme of King Charlemagne, his Guerrino Meschino is an original composition that adheres closely to the epic format. Andrea's work constructs a new corner of the Carolingian universe, introducing the protagonist Guerrino, who descends from a branch of Carolingian nobility from southern Italy and Durazzo, modern-day Durrës in Albania. Midway through a ship voyage in the Adriatic Sea, pirates snatch the infant Guerrino from his parents' embrace and sell him to a merchant in the Greek city, in a Greek market in the Greek city of Thessaloniki. Years later, the adolescent Guerrino excels in all chivalric disciplines and finds him in the service of the court of Constantinople. Despite superseding the status of his merchant caretaker, Guerrino holds no memory of his noble parents or proof of his Carolingian blood. The young knight suspects, however, that innate prowess in jousting and chivalric pursuits hint at origins far loftier than that of a merchant. This nagging thought compels Guerrino to depart Constantinople and embark on a long wandering quest around all continents, corners, and crevices of the known earth to uncover his identity and find his parents. Each piece of his name is revealed one at a time by oracle or prophecy at the culmination of each geographic section. Ptolemy's geography would have to wait until the middle of the 15th century to enjoy a similar fame and recognition as that of Andrea da Barberino's Guerrino Meschino. The lives of the two seemingly unrelated works, one a geographic treatise, the other a Carolingian epic, are, however, tightly bound together. In recounting Guerrino's travels, Andrea da Barberino borrows a vast quantity of toponyms from Ptolemy's geography. For this reason, any diffusion of ideas from Ptolemaic geography among Florentine readers happened thanks to the success of Andrea's Guerrino Meschino. If today we are elected to recognize the introduction of Ptolemy in Florence as a beginning of modern cartography, the intertwined fates of Guerrino Meschino and the Ptolemaic geography suggests an entirely different but equally exciting early reception story surrounding the ancient geographer. What did Florentine readers think when they read the geography? How is it that Ptolemaic geography figures so prominently in Carolingian epic storytelling, two topics that today we divide into cartography and literature? In this discussion, I propose reading Ptolemy not as a work of cartography, but rather attempting to understand how an early 15th century reading audience would have understood the treatise through the lens of scholastic cosmology. I'm particularly interested in exploring how the cosmological context disintegrates borders that separate spatial representation and storytelling. Through a cosmological lens, the connection between epic literature and geography becomes easier to define. Andrea's work, I propose, is an extended reflection on the coterminous relationship between identity construction and space. And this is evident through the many echoes in the text of classical Stoicism and Neoplatonic philosophy. A cosmological interpretation of Ptolemy helps unravel the motivations behind the knight-errant Guerrino's indefatigable quest for his own identity. Jacopo d'Angelo, the translator of the geography into Latin, tells us himself that we are better positioned to understand Ptolemy's geography as a work of cosmology. In the dedication to his Latin translation, Jacopo explains why he retitles the work Cosmographia instead of Geographia, explaining that Ptolemy's 4th century title would confuse his contemporary readers with a cumbersome neologism. Here, modern scholars are reminded of the difficult task of writing and discussing medieval and early modern cartography and geography, since such terminology that we use today and their attendant disciplines do not take shape until much later. The term geography does not make its way back into the treatise, Ptolemy's treatise, until the Berlinghieri first translation of 1478. Jacopo also notes that despite the Greek etymology of the title, Cosmographia, deriving from the Greek cosmos, or universe, the term is used so frequently in the Latin philosophical tradition that his readers can consider it their own terminology. Furthermore, Jacopo cites the recently discovered work of Pomponius Mela and the writings of Pliny the Elder, who used the term Cosmographia and whose writings never disappeared from Western European reading lists. A last important point that Jacopo makes is that cosmology is more complete in its concern with vertical space, the earth in relationship to the heavens, as we see here in the famous Giovanni di Paolo painting, while geography is concerned more with a horizontal space at the level of earth alone. I sense that here there's a lot more behind Jacopo's suggestion that his Florentine readers would wrap their head around the term cosmographia more easily than geographia. Are we to understand wide currency in the sense of a few academics who happen to read Latin and pass their time using the origins of the universe? Or does Jacopo really suggest that wide currency encompasses the interest of a large portion of his fellow citizens who might enjoy reading geography after a day of trading wool? The evidence that I've accumulated so far suggests that a surprising large swath of the Florentine population would have been curious and well prepared to wrap their head around difficult concepts in Guerrino Meschino, as, for example, the contradictions and alignments of Aristotelian and Neoplatonic cosmological theory. The same readers would have also eagerly welcomed the exotic-sounding Ptolemaic place names and cartographic images that the epic prose conjured in the imagination. With Jacopo's renaming of the treatise, I sense a shorthand that appeals to a reading audience with a broad knowledge base of scientific topics. By the time Jacopo d'Angelo translates Ptolemy's treatise and Andrea da Barberino composes his Guerrino Meschino, the dissemination of scientific principles in the Tuscan dialect for the benefit of those outside of university circles, that's to say, those who don't read Latin, had become a time-honored tradition. The natural philosopher Restoro d'Arezzo was the first to write a scientific treatise in the Tuscan language, his Composizione del Mondo. Brunetto Latini's Il Tesoretto and Dante Alighieri's Convivio soon followed, and the tradition has many examples, continuing well into the 15th century, especially with an image I shared yesterday during our discussion, the school book, the images in the school textbook of Borodati's La Sfera. The Guerrino Meschino is likely an adventure text that entertains a young merchant reader while also reviewing the entire natural history, Philosophia Naturalis, school curriculum, a hefty dose of review of course materials, including bestiary, lapidary, plant science, astronomy, history, geography, chronicle, Aristotle, Plato, biblical studies, would have been prerequisites to draw any overarching interpretations of the epic. It was a challenging text. We know that such topics were used in merchant education. Beyond the example of La Sfera, which reviews basic principles of the cosmos and the division of the earth into land and sea, archival records indicate that Coluccio Salutati, for example, had installed a Mappa Mundi in his public library in Prato for the education of young merchants. A basic knowledge of cosmological principles would have been required to interpret the now lost Mappa Mundi in the Siena Palazzo Civico, and the many artistic representations displayed in churches and public places. Personal copies of scientific treatises frequently appear in probate inventories, itemized lists of possessions upon a person's death. Even surviving sermons given in the Church of Santa Maria Novella suggest an impressive knowledge base of scientific principles among the Florentine public. On the evening of March 7, the first day of Lent in the year 1304, the Dominican theologian and preacher Giordano da Pisa gave a sermon to Florentine citizens gathered in the Church of Santa Maria Novella. In a sermon, In principio creavit Deus caelum et terram, Giordano asked his listeners to imagine the pasta that God used to create the universe. Imagine spaghetti floating around. He asked, "Ponimente alla pasta che egli lavora e di che egli fa tutte le cose." So place your mind in thinking about this pasta that he works and with which he makes everything. What is this pasta that God makes all things with, including all creatures? Confident his audience is imagining something close to their everyday world, perhaps their pranzo della domenica, their Sunday lunch. Giordano zeroes in on his cosmological conclusion. Questa pasta è non nulla. This pasta is the nothingness. This sermon goes on to take other objects from the household to explain difficult concepts to the audience. Knowledge of cosmology and its proximity to storytelling, where, as Jacopo d'Angelo tells us, concepts for which the Florentine reading audience would have been well prepared, it makes sense then that Ptolemy's geography was renamed Cosmographia, and the same cosmological point of view best illuminates the narrative strategies of Guerrino Meschino. Let's see. Andrea da Barberino's Guerrino Meschino immerses the young, soon-to-be merchant reader into a world-creating narrative system that hinges upon the common topos of book as a universe, libro dell'universo. The reader navigates a textual cartography that weaves together segments of Ptolemaic, Mappamundi, and portolan cartographic images under an overarching cosmological principle of the logos, the creative power of the word. The universe as a book metaphor encapsulates the opening lines, of course, of the book of John. In the beginning was a word, and imagines cosmic creation as a textual act with a diversity of all objects and beings coming into existence through a semiotic process, like opening a gathering of blank parchment to begin writing. The creation metaphor imagines the universe cleaved open to receive the cosmic ink that gradually creates meaning from a blank void. Cosmological, to read all this, we're going to walk you through this. Cosmological texts in Old French often employ the verb diviser to convey the mutually productive relationship between word and space. Here, just a snapshot of some of the definitions that I'm able to find in these lexicon sources. Diviser in Old French is to put in order, or to trace a plan, to organize the construction of, to choose, to desire. It's also to detail, to talk about. It's also divide in two, separation of two fields, for example, or a marker on the ground that indicates two separate properties. A stone that serves to mark a limit. Later in Tuscan, the verb comes over here, and we get similar meanings to architettare un progetto, to architect a project. Separate that what is united, recognize or underline differences between two or more things or people. To detail, describe, tell in minute detail. The first meaning of diviser is to describe, to tell about, as in Marco Polo's Divisement du Monde, or description of the world. The title of Marco's account also evokes the second meaning of diviser, to divide, to cleave into parts, continents. Natural philosophers, using the Old French diviser and later Tuscan divisare, play upon the polyvalence of the verb to convey the role of the first creator, il primo fattore, who wields the power of the word to cleave the inchoate mass of nothingness, the primordial broth, il brodo primordiale, into distinct, dissimilar parts. Through an ever more granular process of division begins, beings in space are cleaved from a nonsensical void. A striking instance in which Andrea evokes the dual meaning of divisare when Guerrino descends in is when Guerrino descends into the cave of the Sibyl. There's a image from the Monte Sibillini in central Italy. Guerrino arrives in the cave, a profoundly dark liminal space that protrudes somewhere beyond the map in the text. Here the text shifts from the first person, io, and Guerrino speaks directly to the reader. He says, in this part of the story, dear reader, I am not able to divisare, to describe or distinguish or divide what obscurity is different from the other obscurity. In other words, he can't see anything, it's just a dark void. The dark cave is a time machine that returns the weary night to a moment without logic or distinction, the primordial soup before creation. And this darkness impedes the ordering of the semiotic code of creation, and our protagonist is left without words. I am not able to tell you. Andrea conjures a primordial cosmos to characterize a pre-Christian face as illogical and void. The darkness is a world undivided and pre-creation. Skip ahead in the interest of time. So other parts of this text, there are segments of the text that recall perhaps a portolan chart. The passages, just sentences that say, first you'll find Greece, then Italy, then Sicily, then Sardinia, then Corsica, then Provence, then France. So you're following a coastline here. In other segments of the text, you find a panoptic vision. The introduction to book 3 is this is all of Africa. In the text, the portolan passages are often told in the first person. This arbitrary shift between first and third person. What I pose as a interpretation is, and this is a third person, this shifting is a shifting of perspective. We're raised above the earth, the flight of the mind tradition, the Stoic tradition, as in, for example, Cicero's Drama Scipio. So in conclusion, the book universe metaphor speaks to the many ways cartography and literature intermingle, and ink carving out distinction from a blank page of parchment, the colorful Ptolemaic planispheres, the winding curves of continents, seas, and rivers may appear to a 15th century reader as traces of a cosmic author who has created a world you can navigate within the manuscript. The same reader would easily recognize the similarity between Pelagos, or the open ocean, and the coastline, as it relates to, in analogical sense, the page margins in the written text. Andrea da Barberino's Guerrino Meschino equips a reader with a world-making machine whose storytelling, the cartography of a new Carolingian universe, takes shape in the mind's eye in a microcosmic imitation of the macrocosmic creation. This mechanism also allows the reader to extend self into imagined space in a contemplation of identity and origins. Finally, writing, reading, copying, and storytelling are all acts resulting in a sort of a cosmographic mouvance, or movingness of, so those who play a part in the text are able to shift and retrace cartographic boundaries from their imagination. Buried within the thousands of pages of French philologist Joseph Bédier's erudite Région d'épique appears a phrase, this famous phrase, au commencement était la route. The beginning was the road, a phrase that arrives at the inner machine of chivalric literature. Empty space elicits story, and the story expands space. Thank you.